Fake HOA enforcers dragged Michael Bennett's wife out of their home in broad daylight, right onto their own front porch. They wore uniforms, carried forged documents, and acted like they owned the law. But Michael came home just 30 seconds earlier than they expected, and everything changed. Just wait until you see how this nightmare unraveled and why justice in the end hit harder than anyone imagined. Under a sky smeared with dusk, Michael Bennett drove home with the kind of tired contentment that only comes after earning something real. The deal he had been chasing for months had finally closed, and tucked neatly on the back seat of his dusty blue pickup was a long, narrow box, his reward. Inside lay a brand new hunting shotgun, not just a tool but a symbol, a man's gift to himself. For once, the world had slowed down just enough for him to breathe. His knuckles eased off the wheel. The past year had been brutal. Hospital visits, fear, sleepless nights watching his wife Sarah fade into a ghost of herself. But now she was back. Not perfect, still pale around the eyes, but alive. Laughing again. Cooking. Watering her flowers in the front yard barefoot like she used to. They had just started planning a road trip for the fall. Nothing fancy, just open highways and no hospital monitors. A second chance. That's what this evening felt like. Peace. Until it shattered. As Michael turned onto Willow Street, a strange tension gripped his spine. Two vehicles, unfamiliar and unmarked, were wedged against his curb, angled like they had no intention of being neighborly. Both were matte gray, windows darkened, no plates. At first, he thought maybe utility workers or some code inspectors had wandered by, but then he saw the men. Two of them standing on his porch in mismatched tactical vests, bold letters stretched across their backs in a cheap print, HOA enforcement. His brow creased. That wasn't real. Their subdivision didn't have any roaming HOA agents. He never signed off on that, and neither had the board. Something in his chest coiled tight, and then he saw her, Sarah, his wife, standing barefoot on the porch, arms gripped behind her, her face twisted in panic. One of the men, stocky, square-jawed, the kind that looked like he'd never once smiled for real, was holding her by the wrist, pushing her against the wall. Her head snapped back as she tried to speak. The second man circled her like a shark. And then it happened. Michael saw the first one reach for her hair, jerking her back with a sharp motion like she was some kind of threat. Everything stopped. The wheel froze under Michael's hands. The engine was still humming, but it might as well have been miles away. He didn't hear it, didn't hear the birds or the breeze or the subtle ticking of his truck's dashboard. His entire world narrowed to one frame. His front porch, his wife's wide, terrified eyes, and the grip of a stranger's hand pulling her down by the roots. 1 second. 2. 3. The box on the back seat seemed to glow with meaning. Not a gift anymore. Not a trophy. A necessity. A promise. Michael's knuckles whitened around the gear shift. The calm in him didn't break. It shifted, hardened, set like concrete around a single thought. This wasn't going to end the way they planned. Michael didn't park. He didn't aim. He didn't even think. The truck lurched up onto the front lawn in a spray of dirt and grass, as if it had a will of its own. The moment his tires left the pavement, something in him snapped into place. The years of holding back, the calm restraint he practiced in boardrooms, on phones, even in hospitals. Gone. His boots hit the earth before the engine finished stalling. The back door flew open under his grip. He didn't remember unboxing the shotgun. His hands worked faster than thought, steady as stone, sliding the barrel free with mechanical precision. All the noise in the world dimmed to one thing. Sarah's voice, strained, muffled, breaking. That sound would follow him forever. It wasn't just fear. It wasn't just pain. It was betrayal by a world that let this happen. Up the steps, the larger man yanked her by the arm with no care, no pause, dragging her like discarded luggage. Her knees stumbled against the wood, her body limp from struggle. The other one, leaner, tense like a stretched wire, threw open the trunk of their SUV. There was something too practiced in the motion, like this wasn't the first time, like they had a plan, like they'd done this before. Michael's mind recorded every frame in perfect clarity. Sarah's hair was tangled across her face, one sandal missing. On her cheek bloomed a red mark, not fresh enough to be from that second. His stomach turned. She wasn't screaming anymore. That was the part that hit hardest. Her mouth was open but silent. Her eyes had gone glassy, fixed on the sky as if she'd given up trying to change anything. That was when Michael stopped moving like a man and started moving like something else entirely. His breath evened. His grip tightened. He felt no rage, not yet. That would come later. Right now, he only felt focus. This wasn't a mistake. These men didn't pick the wrong house. They hadn't wandered in confused, trying to enforce some bogus HOA ordinance about trash bins or mailbox height. This wasn't neighborly overstep. It was calculated, premeditated, organized. There was no badge, no clipboard, no attempt to talk. They weren't local. They weren't law. They were something worse. And this patch of ground, this porch, this woman they dared to lay hands on. This was Michael's line in the dirt. They didn't know whose yard they'd stepped into. They didn't know the man they'd just invited into the storm. And they definitely didn't know that he'd come home 30 seconds early with a loaded shotgun and nothing left to lose. He moved forward, one step at a time, slow and deliberate, not rushing, but not hesitating either. The weight of the shotgun grounded him like an anchor, every inch of his motion fueled by purpose, not panic. The dry grass crunched under his boots, and with each footfall, the distance between him and the men on his porch melted away. The first one turned, surprised but not fast enough. The cold mouth of the 12-gauge locked onto his chest before he could speak, blink, or breathe. He froze, hands twitching slightly at his sides. For a second, the whole world paused, caught in the tension of what might happen next. Then the second man shifted. He released his grip on Sarah, her arm dropping limp against her side, and moved fast toward his hip. Michael didn't wait. The blast cracked through the air like a lightning strike, silencing everything. Birds vanished from trees. A car alarm screamed 3 blocks away. The man dropped instantly, crashing to the ground with a thud and a strangled cry. He rolled, clutching his forearm, red soaking through his sleeve like a warning flare. He wasn't gone, but he was done. The first one flinched. Michael swung. The wooden stock crashed into his shoulder, then again across the man's chest. The sound was dull and final, like a door slamming shut. The fake officer crumpled, groaning, head spinning from the blow, breath knocked clean from his lungs. Michael's chest rose and fell in hard, even waves. He didn't tremble. He didn't shout. The barrel stayed up, steady as a line drawn in the sand. His voice, when it came, was low and raw. "Who are you?" No answer. Just the wheeze of lungs sucking in dust. The man on the ground whimpered, his injured arm trembling as he tried to press the pain away. The other one coughed blood, touching his lip, eyes unfocused. Behind Michael, Sarah stood frozen near the fence, her hands wrapped around one post like she might fall if she let go. Her lips moved, but no sound came, just breath. Her eyes locked onto his, wide, hollow, pleading for this to be over. The shotgun lowered a fraction but never dropped. Michael's knuckles stayed white. His mind stayed sharp. No part of him relaxed. Not yet. Not while the truth of who these men were still hung in the air like smoke. 5 minutes passed like hours. Sirens shattered the stillness, cutting through the air with rising urgency as red and blue lights bounced across neighboring houses. Squad cars screeched to a halt and a staggered line. Officers spilling out with trained precision, hands on holsters, eyes scanning Willow Street, transformed from a quiet suburb into a lockdown zone. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Someone on the corner was already recording, but Michael didn't move. The shotgun now resting by his side, lowered to the grass as he slowly raised both hands, fingers spread. He didn't speak. He didn't flinch. His face told them everything they needed to know, that he wasn't confused, wasn't afraid, and wasn't sorry. The officers surrounded him cautiously, weapons drawn but not yet aimed. One stepped forward, radio clipped to his shoulder, voice calm but firm. "Sir, step away from the weapon." Michael nodded once, slow and clear, then placed the shotgun on the ground with the care of a father setting down his newborn. He stepped back. Then he spoke, and when he did, his voice didn't shake. He told them everything. Every second from the moment he saw Sarah on the porch to the instant he pulled the trigger. His words were simple, steady, without dramatics. Not a story, just facts. A crime had been unfolding, and he stopped it. The responding officers listened, exchanging tight glances. Then another vehicle rolled in, black SUV, tinted windows. A man in plain clothes stepped out, Detective Lucas Drake. His badge swung from his neck, and his gaze scanned the scene with the efficiency of someone used to chaos. He barely spoke to the uniforms before moving straight to the downed men. The moment his eyes locked onto the broader one, the fake HOA enforcer still groaning on the grass, his face shifted, his jaw clenched. "I know that one," Drake muttered. The silence that followed was heavy. He turned toward the officers. "Get cuffs on him now. His name's Karen Cutler. She's wanted in Polk County. 2 charges of impersonating a public official, 1 attempted kidnapping, and a string of extortion cases tied to fake neighborhood enforcement scams." The other man, now barely conscious, had something pressed beneath his vest. Officers retrieved the items carefully: metal restraints, 2 loaded tranquilizer darts, and a stack of forged compliance documents stamped with a fake county seal. The lead patrol officer lifted the papers, his brow darkening. "They had a full setup," he said. "This wasn't random." Drake nodded grimly. "No, this was organized, targeted. They've been doing this in small towns where nobody asked questions. Until now." Michael didn't say anything. He just looked past them toward Sarah, who stood wrapped in a blanket one of the officers had draped over her shoulders. She hadn't spoken yet, but her eyes followed every move he made. The truth was coming out, and it was worse than anyone expected. They sat in silence for a moment, the porch bathed in the soft glow of early evening, the kind that made everything feel heavier, more real. Drake held a paper cup of black coffee, steam curling upward like a slow exhale. Across from him, Michael sat stiffly in a folding chair, arms crossed, eyes locked on the horizon, but not really seeing it. The silence wasn't awkward. It was necessary. A space to process the kind of day that didn't fit into normal language. Then Drake spoke, his tone low, measured, carrying the weight of someone who knew the system inside and out. "You know we can't arrest you," he said, "not as a favor, not with sympathy, just as a fact. But the DA's office, they'll have to file something. It's procedure now. There'll be a case on paper." Michael turned his head slowly, letting the words settle. His jaw worked once before he responded. "On paper," he echoed, then gave a dry, sharp laugh with no humor in it. "They dragged my wife out like she wasn't even human. If I'd gotten home 5 minutes later." He trailed off, but the implication hung in the air. It wasn't a question. It was a truth too sharp to say out loud. Drake didn't argue. He looked down at his cup for a second, then across the yard toward the porch steps. Sarah sat wrapped in a thick fleece blanket, the kind officers carried for shock victims, though no warmth seemed to reach her. Her hands gripped the edges like armor. Her eyes followed every movement, but she hadn't spoken more than a word since the officers arrived. "I would have done the same," Drake said finally, voice tight but honest. "Any man with a pulse would have. But that doesn't mean it'll be easy. You need to be careful now, Michael. We need a full report from you. Clean, detailed, exact. No gaps, no heat. If there's even a flicker of doubt, their lawyers will grab it and twist it until no one remembers what those guys did." Michael's shoulders tensed, not from fear, from restraint. He had acted on instinct, but now he had to answer to paperwork, to technicalities. Still, he nodded slowly because he understood. Justice didn't always come in one piece. Sometimes it arrived in fragments: truth, proof, process. And if that's what it took to make sure no one ever touched his family again, he'd spell it all out, one breath at a time. It didn't start with a headline. It started with a ripple, a shaky phone video uploaded by a neighbor across the street. 35 seconds of footage that showed a man holding a shotgun on his own lawn, his wife wrapped in a blanket behind him, 2 unknown men on the ground beside a black SUV with no plates. No one watching knew the full story yet, but they knew something had happened, something serious, and that was enough to make it viral. Within hours, local news picked it up. By the next morning, it was on every major outlet. Then the digging began. Journalists started to trace the faces of the so-called HOA enforcement team. At first, there were gaps, no state records, no official HOA listings, no legal basis for their presence. But the more they searched, the more patterns began to emerge. These men weren't new. They had surfaced in neighborhood security footage before. Once in Tampa, pressuring an elderly couple to vacate for community code violations. Once in Phoenix, where a single mother reported threats of forced eviction. Once in Henderson, Nevada, where a retired Army veteran was told to comply or face removal. Each time, they moved on before authorities could act. Each time, they vanished with signatures, property access codes, and just enough legal ambiguity to disappear through the cracks. They used the same uniforms, same generic trucks, same laminated compliance orders printed on forged county letterhead. But behind them was a network, layers of shell companies and real estate trusts that couldn't be traced to a single name. They called it distressed property acquisition. What it really was, institutional theft, an entire operation built on fear, confusion, and rapid pressure. Their method was simple: target families in transition, homes that had missed a payment or two, people who wouldn't call lawyers first, then show up, act official, and overwhelm them with threats, jargon, and intimidation. And it worked. Over a dozen homes across 3 states were quietly abandoned within weeks of their visits. No formal evictions, no police records, just vanished, until Michael Bennett stood in their way. The footage of Michael's standoff, combined with testimony from his wife Sarah and the arrest reports from Detective Drake's team, cracked the entire case open. Karen Cutler, an ex-private contractor with sealed court records in 2 states and open warrants in a 3rd. The second man, under a fake name, carried tranquilizer darts, illegal restraints, and forged access codes for home alarm systems. Both were charged on multiple counts before the sun rose the next morning. But it didn't stop there. As the investigation deepened, authorities uncovered property transfer records connecting the fake enforcement group to shadow entities that had been acquiring real estate at suspiciously low prices. When examined closely, the same names kept surfacing on transaction documents, either as witnesses, notaries, or compliance officers. These weren't isolated scams. This was an operation with funding, structure, and regional coordination. Local governments launched inquiries. Federal housing regulators stepped in. What began as a suburban defense story became the center of an interstate fraud probe. And Michael? He hadn't asked to be part of it. Sitting on his back porch days later, he didn't feel like a hero. He watched the coverage in silence, hand wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, while reporters used his name in every intro. The Bennett incident, the homeowner who fought back. But none of them were there when he pulled into his driveway and saw the life he rebuilt about to be taken apart. None of them felt the weight of the shotgun in his hands or the silence in Sarah's eyes after it was over. Drake visited again, this time with agents in suits. They shook his hand, told him he'd done the right thing, promised accountability, promised change. But Michael knew better. Systems didn't change because of headlines. They changed because people paid attention after the cameras were gone. That's what he hoped for now, that people would keep watching, keep asking questions, keep refusing to accept answers that didn't make sense. Because the crack he made in that machine, it wasn't wide enough yet, but it had started. And once something breaks, it's only a matter of time before the rest begins to fall. The trial stretched on for 2 long weeks, each day feeling heavier than the last. From the moment Michael stepped into the courtroom, every detail seemed designed to remind him how much was at stake. The polished wood of the benches, the distant echo of footsteps in the hallways, the constant scratching of pens on paper. All of it pressed in like the walls were moving closer with each hour. Across from him sat the defense, a sharp team of attorneys backed by hidden money, their suits crisp, their smiles practiced, their voices calm as they tried to reshape the truth into something manageable, palatable, stripped of urgency. They didn't argue the facts. They couldn't. There was video. There were eyewitnesses. There were medical reports, but they leaned hard on tone. They painted Michael as reactive, reckless, a man who let adrenaline override judgment. They called what happened an unfortunate escalation and tried to frame Karen Cutler and her accomplice in tactical vests as misguided, not malicious. They showed still images instead of footage, clipped quotes instead of testimony, all to craft a narrative that danced just shy of reasonable doubt. But the truth was bigger than their spin. The prosecution began methodically laying out the timeline in measured steps. They showed the footage from Officer Kincaid's helmet cam first, the moment his squad car pulled onto Willow Street, the sound of a single siren slowing to a stop, the clear view of Sarah Bennett wrapped in a blanket, eyes vacant, one sandal missing. Then came the security footage from the neighbor across the street, 39 seconds of raw confrontation. Michael stepping out of his truck, Michael shouting warnings, Michael firing low and wide, not to kill but to stop. Every second spoke louder than any courtroom plea. Medical experts followed. They described the bruising on Sarah's wrists, the swelling across her cheekbone, the physical symptoms of extreme distress. One trauma nurse testified that, in her professional opinion, the level of force used by Michael intervened in what could have escalated into irreversible harm. Her words hung in the air. No one interrupted. Neighbors testified next. Each one described the noise, the panic, the fear that swept through the street that evening. A retired teacher said it was the first time in 30 years she had ever seen anything like it. A teenager recalled hearing Sarah's voice, choked and shaking, long before the sirens arrived. And then there was Officer Drake. He spoke last. Drake took the stand with quiet authority. He described the scene, his own recognition of one of the suspects, and the evidence they recovered from the SUV. Restraints, syringes, and forged documents tied to a known real estate fraud network operating across 3 states. He made it clear, this wasn't vigilantism, this wasn't chaos. This was a man stepping in when no one else could. And then the room turned to Judge Harmon. He was a man known for balance, for rarely raising his voice, and for choosing words that were remembered long after the transcript was filed away. That morning, the entire courtroom sat still as he rose from behind the bench. His robe swayed slightly as he looked across the room, eyes scanning both sides, defense, prosecution, gallery, press. His voice was steady, not grand but grounded in something unshakable. This court has reviewed all presented evidence, he began, including witness testimony, expert analysis, and law enforcement records. What occurred on the evening in question was not an act of aggression but of intervention. Mr. Bennett responded to an immediate and unlawful threat to his wife's safety on his own property. He paused then, letting the silence settle before continuing. The force he used was proportionate, precise, and restrained. In fact, it is the opinion of this court that had Mr. Bennett not returned home when he did, the consequences for his wife could have been far more severe. The court finds no basis for criminal liability. No charges will be filed. The case is dismissed. There was no outburst, no cheer, just stillness, heavy and sacred, like the kind that falls after a storm finally breaks. Michael closed his eyes, not in victory, but in exhaustion. Every second of that night had replayed in his mind over and over for weeks. Each choice, each breath, each moment when things could have gone differently. Now, for the first time, it felt like he could stop holding his breath. He felt Sarah's hand before he saw it, her fingers settling gently on his shoulder. She stood behind him, wrapped in a light shawl, her posture straighter than it had been in days. Her eyes still carried the echo of fear, but her grip was strong. She was standing again, breathing again, and for Michael, that was enough. 2 months had passed since that day, though for Michael Bennett, it didn't feel like a countdown. There was no ticking clock, no clear line between before and after, just the slow, quiet return of things that once seemed ordinary. Grass growing along the fence again, the mail arriving on time, Sarah humming softly while folding laundry by the window. But some things had changed for good. The fence around their property had been replaced, taller now, stronger, with reinforced posts and a new locking gate that clicked shut with a sound that made Michael's shoulders ease slightly every time he heard it. The cameras were smarter too, motion sensitive, with live alerts connected to cloud storage, all sent to his phone. It wasn't about paranoia. It was about peace of mind. But more important than any hardware were the eyes in that house. Michael saw it in the way Sarah moved through their kitchen without glancing over her shoulder, in the way she watered the flowers out front again, this time with her head held higher, in the way she stood straighter when she spoke to neighbors at the market. The fear hadn't vanished. It had been replaced by something quieter, stronger: awareness, resolve. They didn't forget what had happened, but they weren't controlled by it anymore. The story never really left the headlines. Journalists still called every other day. Some wanted an interview. Others pitched podcast features. One even floated a book deal, wanted to title it 30 Seconds Early. There were offers from talk shows and panel discussions, security companies wanting endorsements, even a documentary producer who offered to fly a crew out to their home. Michael said no to all of it. Not out of anger, not even out of exhaustion, just because it didn't feel right. What happened to them wasn't entertainment. It wasn't a brand. It was a moment that nearly changed everything, and it was theirs. He spent more time in the backyard these days. The workshop where he kept his tools was cleaner than it had been in years. Most afternoons, he sat in a fold-out chair with a cloth in one hand and a bottle of oil in the other, carefully maintaining the shotgun that had become a symbol, whether he liked it or not. Neighbors would sometimes stop by. Some asked questions. Some just nodded and said nothing. But the few who stayed long enough to sit with him always heard the same thing eventually: calm, simple, stripped of drama. "I'm not a hero," Michael would say, running the cloth down the barrel with slow, practiced care. "I just came home 30 seconds earlier than they expected." And then he'd glance toward the porch, where Sarah sat with her tea, watching birds drift across the sky, her legs tucked under her, eyes clear. And maybe, just maybe, that was what saved their lives.